Well, scientists always stand on the shoulders of giants, and of course, whenever you're talking about evolution, Darwin is the giant. But certainly, you've made a huge contribution to the field of evolutionary biology over the years. But I'm going to ask you to set your humility aside for a minute and just say, what do you think? Point out one or two. You've mentioned one, the introgression. Are there anything else you'd like to mention about sort of summing up your work over the years?
Well, to sum up over the years, the main things I think that we've been able to see is that we've been able to show that natural selection occurs with an evolutionary response that can happen actually over a generation. And so this has been remarkable in wild birds.
So a very short time.
A very, very short time. The other thing is the role of introgression, and then one very exciting thing that we've been able to see is that we've been able to follow the origin of a new lineage, which we've been able to follow it from its inception up through 6 generations. And so we've actually seen the origin of a new lineage, which has been really very exciting.
So to amplify that last point, hybridization was involved in this case.
Yes.
A really fascinating situation in which 2 species are hybridized to form a third one. So A plus B equals C. We know this from the plant world, but from the animal world this is exceedingly rare. We saw it in the natural circumstance of a little island right in the middle of the Galapagos archipelago. I would also add one extra thing about standing on the shoulders of giants. So undoubtedly, we stand on the shoulders of Charles Darwin, as all evolutionary biologists nowadays do. But we also stood and have been standing on the shoulders of another giant. He is David Lack, an Englishman like Darwin, who went to the islands in 1939. And he wrote a monograph in 1947, which was the basic extension of Darwin's views in modern terms, and laid out a scheme that we have found to be upheld by almost everything that we have discovered. Rosalie's mentioned hybridization and the exchange of genes as something in addition. David Lack didn't know about that, but in all other respects, he, like Darwin, we think, got it right.
Okay. So this A plus B equals C. Is there a common name to this C, or what do you call it?
Yes, I would actually say, I'm sorry, I'm going to slightly disagree.
You don't have to apologize.
I would say it is, I mean, you often think it's A plus B equals C, but actually the C comes, it's A, species A hybridizes with species B, produces a hybrid which then back crosses to one or other of the parental species. And it's only this last step, back crossing, that allows genes to flow from one species to another. So it's not quite the direct hybrid that mates with another hybrid that produces another species. It's actually the genes that flow from one species into another that alters the genetic combinations of this species, which selection can then act on and take it off on another trajectory.
Right, so my A plus B equals C is exactly that new trajectory.
Yes.
We had the very interesting case where an immigrant individual from one species came to the island, mated with individuals of another species we could call the A is the immigrant and B a resident, and they produced offspring. 2 generations later, that lineage was breeding within itself, within individuals of the lineage were breeding amongst themselves and not breeding with any of the resident individuals. So it's like the beginning of a new species. Should we call it a new species just because in just 2 or 3 generations they don't breed with the members of the resident? That's a very uncertain question. It depends upon how one likes to recognize what a species is. But at the very minimum, it is the beginnings of a new species, a new trajectory, evolutionary trajectory that we would call a new species.
So I'll ask the question, I think probably on everybody's mind. If they went to the Galapagos, would you be able to look at that bird, that new species, and say, yep, that's it? Or do you have to look at the bands on its legs and look at the blood samples to tell?
It is, they're much bigger. If you go to Daphne, its closest relative is Fortis. Fortis is about an 17 to 18 gram bird. these birds are 28 grams, so they're considerably bigger.
Yeah.
They have a plumage which is rather dull black. It's very dark, but it's a dull black. So it would be difficult, but if you look at size and it also, there's a slight difference in beak shape. That would be probably. But also the other thing that is very striking is the song is very different.
Oh,
so
okay.
you can tell the difference by its size and its song.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.